is a good deal. Then we turn to the Post editorial, and there's a lot there. Well, the Post editorial leads to some other kind of interesting subjects. So I'm going to tip my hand today and tell you that the Post is going to get the coveted blue star again today. Their editorial is Guam shouldn't copy CNMI's land ownership restriction. Guam's island neighbors to the north, collectively the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, offer one big stark difference from what Guam has to offer. Now that's quite a phrase. One big stark difference. And it has to do with realizing the American dream of owning one's home, including the land that the house sits on. On Guam, pretty much anyone who has the means to buy land can do so, including foreigners who are permanent U.S. residents, Americans, both naturalized or born U.S. citizens, and foreign investors. In the CNMI, bloodline dictates who can own land. As a commonwealth under the U.S. flag, Americans in the Northern Marianas are forbidden from owning land if they do not meet the bloodline requirements. The CNMI Constitution states that land ownership is exclusive to those who have at least 1/4 Northern Marianas Chamorro or Northern Marianas Carolinian blood, or a combination thereof, etc. Now this, of course, is something, this is ground we've already plowed here on Tall Tales in the context of who is a second-class citizen, a phrase that I will ding you for if you use it on Tall Tales. I hear the demagogues repeatedly saying, well, you know, people here in Guam are second-class citizens because we can't vote for president. It just ain't so, and I've explained it, I think, quite clearly and quite thoroughly, but when it comes to classes of citizens, obviously citizens, United States citizens in the Northern Marianas who are of Northern Marianas descent are of a higher class than those of us who are not, because only citizens of Northern Marianas descent can own fee simple title to real property in the Northern Marianas. So the editorial goes on to say, in the CNMI, a corporation can own land if 51% of the people who own the corporation are persons of Northern Marianas descent, and at least 51% of voting shares are owned by persons of Northern Marianas descent. Now, I suspect that that guy, I can't point to him, you know who I mean, the smart money, the guy that always sits over there on the right-hand side of the screen, and that lazy boy who always knows all of the answers even before I've posed the questions. He's sitting there saying, oh, that's unconstitutional. Well, that scheme has gone to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and the Ninth Circuit has said that it's okay. And the reason it's okay is because it's in the covenant between the United States and the Northern Mariana Islands. Some distinctions need to be made here. The United States did negotiate with the Northern Mariana Islands in order to set up the covenant, which in a sense has some of the aspects of a treaty between two sovereign states. So the Northern Marianas Islands were not sovereign before they joined the American Union, but they weren't part of the United States either. They were part of the trust territory of the Pacific Islands, just like the freely associated states. So although the United States would not be able to enter into that kind of an agreement with Guam because of Article 4, Section 3 of our Constitution, the United States obviously did with the Northern Marianas, and the Ninth Circuit said it's okay. Now, you life members of Tall Tales know that I have said repeatedly that as far as the Chamorro Land Trust Commission, Land Trust Act is concerned, I'm opposed to it because I think that restricting the free alienability of land doesn't do anyone any good, even the so-called beneficiaries of the program. But I'll put that aside for the moment and go back to the editorial. Why is this relevant to Guam now? Doris Flores Brooks, a former public auditor and a candidate for Guam's seat in the Congress, mentioned the CNMI's land ownership law in a statement Thursday. To be clear, she mentioned the CNMI specifically in the context of seeking U.S. Congress approval of the Chamorro Land Trust Commission's program, which grants land leases to, quote, native Chamorro people. The U.S. Department of Justice has challenged this law by filing a lawsuit in the federal court calling it racially biased. And we've spent some time talking about that. And my take on it is I don't know how anyone could say that the Chamorro Land Trust Act is anything but racially biased, since its strongest proponents say that the purpose of it is to make sure that there will always be Chamorros owning land on Guam, no matter what. Now, I will tip my hat to Booney Dog Chamorro. Booney, I hope you're listening, but of course, we miss you even when there's Facebook, because you said you can't post on Facebook anymore. Today, there's no Facebook for Booney Dog Chamorro to post on. But Booney Dog Chamorro urges me to make the distinction between ethnicity and race. And here's an easy way to look at it. A person could be what we would call black, you know, of African descent and African American, and his mother tongue could be Spanish. Well, maybe his ethnicity is Spanish. Well, his race is black, and so on across the board. But I think the way that the U.S. government is and our laws concerning fair housing and these other things are concerned, race is used in a sort of a broad, generic sense where the strict line between ethnicity and race is blurred. And so when we're talking about the native Chamorro people, I suppose what we're really talking about is an ethnicity, because racially a person, at least as I understand the way we deal with that term on Guam, a person can be 99.9% Apaka and still be recognized as Chamorro. If he can look kind of like Elizabeth Warren, if he can look backwards into his ancestors and find a Chamorro back amongst his great-grandparents, he would still be considered by all and sundry as Chamorro. So I suppose in that respect you could say that Chamorro is an ethnicity. But for simplification purposes, in this discussion, we'll talk about Chamorro as though it is a race. So to be clear, back to the editorial, Doris mentioned that the CNMI, specifically in the context of seeking the U.S. Congress approval of the Chamorro Land Trust Program, which grants land leases to native Chamorro people. The U.S. Department of Justice has challenged this law by filing a lawsuit in the federal court and calling it racially biased. And my retort after that little exegesis about race and ethnicity is, yeah, it is racially biased, and its champions would say, and that's exactly why we want it, because it is racially biased. It's not for everyone. And then Doris goes on to say it's important for the CLTC to be congressionally sanctioned because the Department of Justice wants it outlawed. I don't know about the word outlawed. If it's not constitutional it's not constitutional. Outlaw is kind of like passing a law saying that things that have some of the same effects as marijuana, even though they aren't marijuana. I'm talking about spice. Those things are going to be outlawed. But finding an unconstitutionality, does it work?
Yeah, it looks like you're on YouTube Live.
Wow.
And I went to Ray Gibson's Facebook page to find the link.
Okay.
So you're on YouTube Live.
I'm on YouTube. Boy, I'm impressed. I'm impressed with my own importance.
Thanks, Ray.
So I got to go to Ray Gibson's Facebook page, huh?
That's where I found the link. So I'm going to share it on my page as well so other people can see it.
Okay, well, the next break, I'm going to go to Ray Gibson's Facebook page and go to YouTube Live. Great. Because right now, the only place I can see myself on a screen is right here in the studio, and I feel like I'm really kind of depriving our international radio listening audience of something rather precious, right? Real Joe Cruz?
Yes, sir.
Uh-huh. So enough about outlawed, and then going on to say DOJ claims it's racially biased. Well, the DOJ's in good company because I do too, and as I keep saying, and so do its strongest proponents. But indigenous land rights have been sanctioned for other island communities, Brooks said. Now, and then Brooks goes on to say, Congress sanctioned the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act, that was back in 1920, and in the case of the CNMI, Section 805 of the covenant between the government and the Northern Marianas approves the restriction on land alienation. That's what we were just talking about. Brooks' news release further states this was in view of the importance of the ownership of land for the culture and traditions of the people of the Northern Mariana Islands. Okay. The CNMI negotiated the exclusivity on land ownership in the 1970s. And this is the editorial. In past economic downturns in the CNMI, there have been suggestions to do away with the land ownership restriction. And that brings it back to my own objection to the Chamorro Land Trust Act. If there is not free alienability of land, then it makes it very difficult for people to borrow money against the land. What I'm talking about is mortgage. And if you can't mortgage the land, then it makes it very difficult to improve the land. And if people living in a jurisdiction are unable to improve the real property in their town, then it's going to have a dampening effect on the economy of that location. But that's me, that's not Doris. Brooks said in arguing for congressional protection of the CLTC that, quote, our Chamorro values, culture, and traditions are no less important than those of the indigenous people of the Northern Marianas and Hawaii. Well, okay. I would say that goes not only for Chamorros, but everybody in the whole world. Everyone's culture is as important as everyone else's. Even if you grew up on the island of Manhattan, your culture is as important to you as the culture of someone living in Maui, for instance. Doris says, these issues are worth fighting for, and I will do that in Washington. Okay. I'm proud to be an American, she said, but I'm also a proud Chamorro. When the Organic Act was adopted in 1950, no thought was given to our culture and traditions. But, you know, when the Organic Act was adopted, one of the earlier drafts of the Organic Act had an anti-alienation provision so as to protect the local people of Guam. But obviously that didn't make it into the act as passed by Congress. So Doris goes on to say, it's time to pursue change that assures Chamorro ownership of CLTC land. And the editorial comes along and says it's one thing for Brooks to advocate for the preservation of the Chamorro Land Trust Commission's land programs for Native Chamorro people. It's entirely different matter to bring up making the land ownership restriction in the CNMI as a model for Guam under any circumstance. The reason why Guam is a more dynamic melting pot, there's a reason why Guam is a more dynamic melting pot of different cultures. Anyone who wants to plant roots here can do so without restrictions based on ancestry or bloodline. Let's not ruin what's working for Guam. So picking up on some of these points, you'll remember yesterday at the end of the program when I started something new, the last 10 minutes being devoted to social commentary, I mentioned that when I was a youngster, I know that tests credulity. You're probably thinking, I don't think that guy was ever young, but I was once upon a time. And when I was in grade school in social studies, we learned that America was a melting pot, that the national motto, E pluribus unum, meant from many one, and that people came from all over the world to the United States. Well, I'll come back to the melting pot right after this commercial.
Are high power bills sending your budget into chaos? Take control with the help of Micronesia Renewable Energy. Using the highest quality panels, a solar energy system from MRE will guarantee to save you money on power. With MRE, Christmas comes early. With every solar energy system, homeowners not only get $400 for signing up, but also an entry for a chance to win $1,000 in cold, hard cash, just in time for Christmas. It pays to be an MRE customer. Conditions apply. Call 632-2613 for details. MRE, the smarter choice.
John Gibson, digging up history. The president who didn't realize he'd been nominated because he wouldn't pay postage due. That story after this. Let's talk heirloom sheets and towels from Redland Cotton in Alabama. First, the family farm, growing the finest cotton in the world. The spinning, the looming, every step made in America, right down to the cutting and sewing. Sheets designed from a long-lost 1920s weave. The softest, most comfortable, longest-lasting sheets you've ever slept on. The Redland family dedicated to America and linens you'll treasure. Check out redlandcotton.com for America's linen. redlandcotton.com. Back to my story. It was 1848. Zachary Taylor was a war hero for defeating Santa Anna in the war on Mexico. Living in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, he was annoyed that people were sending him fan mail short of the correct postage, which he was expected to pay. He told the postmaster, if it's postage due, put it in the dead letter box. What he didn't know, in that box was a letter the Whig Party had nominated him for president, and they hadn't heard back. Word of the nomination reached him weeks later by newspapers. He went to collect the official letter, shocked to find he owed $7 whole in fees and fines, over $100 today, all on postage due of only a penny. I'm John Gibson, digging up history.
Welcome back to Tall Tales with Bob Klitsky, Guam's single voice of reason. Call now, 888-TALK. That's 888-8255.
So here we are again talking about Doris Brooks and the Chamorro Land Trust Commission. And I heard Doris on the Ray Gibson show this morning, and I read a coverage of Doris's chat with Michael San Nicolas in the Post, and I believe also in the Daily News. I probably have a little difficult time remembering where I heard what, but I think perhaps the Post is misinterpreting what Doris was intending to say. And what Doris is, I think the meaning that Doris is conveying is this, that we ought to, that we, meaning Guam, meaning our representative in Congress, ought to ask the Congress to amend the Organic Act to allow for a Chamorro Land Trust Commission or a Chamorro Land Trust Act that would legitimize giving the land to Chamorros, that would have to amend the equal protection part of the Organic Act to say that this is not a violation of equal protection. And then I think Doris alluded to the Northern Marianas, and to the Northern Marianas because it is a way of saying, well, see, the Congress has done this before, so we're not asking them to do something that they haven't done before. We're just asking for the same thing. And she's also saying that Congress back in 1920 kind of did the same thing with the Hawaiian Homes Act. So I think that's the point she's trying to make, that her request would not be without precedent, so to speak. From what I read and what I heard this morning, I'm not saying that Doris is advocating that we have a law in Guam that said only Chamorros can own fee simple real property. So there may be room for a misunderstanding there. Something else, though, that I heard Doris say, or maybe I read it, was that it's really not racial discrimination because and this is the same thing that Ken Orcutt said on behalf, and Deputy Attorney General Ken Orcutt said in defense of the Department of Justice's suit, that the purpose of the Chamorro Land Trust Act was to provide a remedy for those whose real property was condemned post-World War II and were unable to obtain real property after that. And I have to take issue with that argument, because if you look at public law, what is it, 10-212, I just looked at the public law the other day, and unlike almost everything else the legislature ever does, there is no statement of legislative findings or statement of legislative purpose. Ordinarily, if a bill is one sentence long and the one sentence says that every dog must have a license, you can depend that there will be 3 or 4 paragraphs of legislative findings at the beginning of the bill. So that's the usual approach, but not in this case. There were no legislative findings as a predicate to the Chamorro Land Trust Act telling us that it had anything to do at all to do with post-World War II land takings. And there's nothing in the statute, in the body of the statute itself, that would give even the slightest hint that that's the case. Now, if there were language in the statute that said that those Chamorros who owned fee simple title to real property that was condemned by the United States government would perhaps have some sort of a priority when it came to the granting of the leases. So other than the way that the statute is enacted now, if you work for the Department of Land Management or you're Mike Bora's relative, you get some kind of a priority. But putting the sarcasm aside, there's nothing like that in the Chamorro Land Trust Act at all. There is a section that says that if you don't own any other real property, you are first priority. So I'm going to say that I think the Daily News missed the boat here. I'm sorry, the Post missed the boat because they were perhaps finding something that wasn't there, perhaps saddling Doris with a burden that she really doesn't deserve. Or perhaps if Doris speaks on this matter again, she could be clearer that she's not advocating a restriction on alienation of real property on Guam. But what she would like to do is have a congressional statute that would constitutionally legitimatize the Chamorro Land Trust Act. And you Tall Tales buffs would remember that I have proposed that time and time again, that when it comes to that and our so-called plebiscite, instead of spending all kinds of money on a litigation that never gets us anywhere, we'd be much better off going to the United States Congress, because the beauty of our status, being an unincorporated territory of the United States, I can make a good argument is the best possible status under the American flag, because unincorporated territories can have much greater flexibility than anything else under the American flag, including any one of the states. So Congress could do for the Chamorro Land Trust Act what it couldn't do for someplace, for one of the states or the District of Columbia. So I think Doris is on the right track there, and I think it's the only way that this matter will ever be resolved. The counterpoint raised by Michael San Nicolas is, and I might get to that on the card, but in case I don't, Michael San Nicolas says, no, the way to go about that is to have tribal designation. So I think what Michael is saying, that we should ask that the federal government, you know how much I hate that word or that nomination, the national government would recognize, quote, Chamorros as a tribe, just as it has recognized Choctaw, Chickasaw, Sioux, and the other types of Indian tribes. And every time this comes up, I always have to bring a degree of common sense to the conversation, because one needs to look at Article 1, Section 8 of the United States Constitution, and at paragraph 3. When read, it says, the Congress shall have the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states and with the Indian tribes. So my analysis of that is that there are no Indian tribes that didn't exist at the time that the Constitution was enacted, and that those Indian tribes were separate sovereigns. The United States entered into treaties with a lot of those Indian tribes, still maintains treaty relationships with a lot of those Indian tribes, and has a special kind of trust relationship with Indian tribes, and actually holds the fee title to the Indian lands, the lands that Indian reservations are located on. So no matter how badly you would want to have the folks here that are Chamorro be recognized as an Indian tribe, unless we have a time machine, that couldn't be done, because every Indian tribe that there ever was in existence at the time the Constitution was adopted. And I know the guy over there in the Lazy Boy, if you can see me here on Facebook, I'm pointing to him over there, the smart money, is saying, well, yeah, what about Native Alaska corporations, and what about this, and what about that? Well, those are all programs that are set up under affirmative action. They're not part of the mechanism where the United States deals with Indian tribes. So in this particular case, Doris' idea is the bell ringer. Mike's idea, poorly thought out, and suffers from the infirmity of being impossible. Now, I want to go back to this part of the editorial. Talking about when Guam became, I'm proud to be an American. I'm also proud to be a Chamorro. When the Organic Act was adopted in 1950, no thought was given to our culture and traditions. Maybe, maybe not. But I think that most people have forgotten what the Organic Act said when at the time it was enacted. And here's an interesting part of the Organic Act. It doesn't go to culture or tradition, but it does go to the recognition of, quote, Chamorros. And this is what it says. The governor shall, except as otherwise provided in this act or the laws of Guam, appoint by and with the advice and consent of the legislature all heads of executive agencies and instrumentalities. In making appointments and promotions, preference shall be given to qualified persons of Guamanian ancestry, with a view to ensuring the fullest participation by Guamanians in the government of Guam. Opportunities for higher education and in-service training facilities shall be provided to qualified persons of Guamanian ancestry. So there you have it. Preference, a definite preference as far as the newly created government of Guam for people of Guamanian ancestry. And I'm going to tell the smart money over there, just hold your tongue, because I'm coming to that. In 1950, the word Guamanian was a synonym for Chamorro. And I probably, I know I'm getting old and have a tendency to tell the same story more than once, so just put up with me one more time. But I can tell you this, 55 years ago, when I was attempting to learn a little bit about Ifino Chamorro, after I'd been here for about a half a year, I asked one of my fellow teachers, I hear the word Chamorro every once in a while. What does that mean? And that fellow teacher said, oh, that's how we say Guamanian in our language. In other words, the word Chamorro, if you're speaking English and you want to talk about Chamorro, say a Chamorro person, you'd say, oh yeah, he's married to a Guamanian. So Guamanian has a totally different meaning now than what it had at the time the Organic Act was adopted, because at the time the Organic Act was adopted, Guamanian meant Chamorro. And there's a historic reason for that. Going back to World War II, the people on Guam wanted to make a strong distinction between themselves and Chamorros from Saipan. So that's how the term Guamanian came to mean Chamorro in the English language. Now, that started to change somewhere in the 70s when I think political correctness caused some people to try to find a little bit more of an egalitarian term, or maybe it was Governor Calvo. I think Governor Calvo was talking about the Guamanian dream. And for Governor Calvo and the Guamanian dream, Guamanian meant anybody who's living here, regardless of his Boonie Dog Chamorro, regardless of his ethnicity. So that's a lot of information, I think, that's necessary to understand that one particular editorial. So given the once again, the feel-good nature of the Daily News editorial, and perhaps giving the Post a little leeway on zooming in on a potential problem, even though it is perhaps not properly suggested by events, I'm going to have to give you got that drum roll ready there, Real Joe Cruz? There it is. It goes to the Post today again. So you win some, you lose some, Daily News. So that's it for the Meet the Press portion of the program. Moving on down the The card, the next item on my card is Jeff Flakey versus the GOP, versus the Grand Old Party. And maybe things are going to kind of come our way here. I've made no secret that I wanted to see Brett Kavanaugh confirmed to the Supreme Court. I've made no secret as to my critical evaluation of the Supreme Court and how they brought this whole Kavanaugh kerfuffle upon themselves by taking over the power to make law and amend the United States Constitution all by themselves. But it is what it is, and it's the best we've got. So I want to see someone on the court that I would find to be acceptable. Now, a lot of people have said, yeah, but what about his temperament? Well, he did show anger before the United States Senate. I have, in my short, almost 80 years, I've met lots of people who are capable of showing anger under extreme provocation, although most of the time they are about as temperamental as a snail. So I'm not gonna be too temperamental about this. I'm gonna take a short break and come back and finish up on Jeff Flakey.
It's Micronesia Mall's 30th anniversary, and to celebrate, we are giving away a new Kia Soul LX, a Mazda 3i Sport, the popular Honda Civic LX, and 30 Manila Flyaways during our 30th anniversary Drive-Away Flyaway. Win 3 great cars from Triple J Auto Group, 30 Flyaways from Philippine Airlines, plus thousands of prizes from Burger King and Foot Locker when you play Micronesia Mall's 30th anniversary Drive-Away Flyaway.
Yeah, sure enough, Real Joe Cruz. I went to Ray Gibson's Facebook, and there I am, big as life, twice as ugly. Although I don't know if maybe it's a frozen picture, but anyhow, next break I'll play with it a little bit more. So Jeff Flakey may have accidentally stumbled into doing something right for the wrong reason. And the reason I say that is that he and a couple of the other swing voters have said that there's no corroboration of Christine Ford's allegations in the FBI report. So if there's no allegation in the FBI report, that really lets a lot of the air out of the Democrats' tires, because they have stacked a lot of chips on that, saying, how can we possibly go forward here without an FBI report? Now, of course, the ink was hardly dry in the report before Chuck Schumer and DiFi said, it's not what we wanted. It's not good enough. It's got to be more in depth, etc. Give us a few more hours, and we'll think of some other reasons that we can't go forward with this. We'll figure it out somehow. So if it does bring the other swing voters along, Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski and Jeff Flakey himself, and Kavanaugh is confirmed, then it would kind of remind me of a basketball experience I had once upon a time, way back when I was in high school. This is another one of those things that sounds like a tall tale. Bob could never have possibly been in high school, but I was. And, of course, in high school, I was altitudinally superior to most of my classmates, so I played a lot of basketball. And the coach we had one year had a 2-pass rule. Nobody shoots until we've passed the ball twice. And his idea there, I think, was he wanted to keep the gunners under control, and that by developing some passing skills, it would be more likely that a shot could be taken, a successful shot could be taken, than if you just brought the ball down the floor and let it fly. Now, of course, this is back in the day before the 3-point rule was in place, so you got just as many points for a layup as you did for a shot that was 25 feet out in the field. And no, Mr. Smart Money over there, we didn't have a center jump after every basket. It wasn't that long ago. But anyhow, in a key game, a player named Jerry is dribbling down the floor and got a little daylight and penetrated a little bit and took a shot. And as he was taking the shot, the coach throws his program on the floor and hollers at Jerry by his last name as if, "What the hell are you doing?" But the ball went in the basket. And it turned out that that was a key basket. So what do you do in a case like that? Bench Jerry after that because he didn't comply with the 2 passes rule? Probably not. So if this works out, there will be people who are saying, "Yeah, Jeff Flake really did a good one there when he asked for that FBI investigation." I don't subscribe to that theory. I'm just saying that there will be some who say that, and I'm still sticking by my original projection that the other side, the left, is playing extremely hardball, and Republicans can't get it through their heads that they're not going to get very far with being nice guys like Jeff was. But anyhow, I'm trying to kind of look at the whole picture here and see what develops. But if I am correct, then I would make a suggestion to Mitch McConnell that he assign an armed guard to Jeff Flake to stay with Jeff at all times, and that under no circumstance should Jeff ever be let near an elevator. Because you let the guy near an elevator and a couple of people come along and holler at him, and there's just no telling what he's going to do. So I'm looking at YouTube Live, and it actually works. It's the same as Facebook was. There's a time delay between this screen and the monitor in the studio. And I'm very happy to say that Rico Blancaflor and Jose Martinez have found me here way out in the boonies on Facebook Live. So good going, guys. Good detective work. Glad to see you here, so I don't have to do this whole thing all by myself. And anybody else that's jonesing on because of his lack of Facebook Live, go to Ray Gibson's Facebook page, and you'll be able to click around a little bit, and you'll be able to see Tall Tales live, just as though you were right here, right? Things that keep coming out. For example, she said under oath in Congress, she had never ever been near a polygraph. She could just barely spell the word. She didn't know anything about it. She'd never coached anybody, etc. Well, it turns out that she had coached one of her close friends as to how to take a polygraph examination preparatory to an interview for a federal job. And there's the matter of her not wanting to fly. Her lawyers might have a problem there because committee chairman offered to fly to California to interview Christine Ford instead of making her come to D.C. And when she was on the stand, she said she indicated that she didn't know that that was an option. So one of two things is going on there. Either she's not telling the truth, or her lawyers didn't tell her. Because, of course, if the interview had taken place in California, they couldn't have gotten anywhere as near as much mileage out of it as they did by having it in the Senate chamber, with those 11 men, Republicans, sitting on the dais looking down on her. So I guess what I'm saying is that it's probably not too much of a surprise that the FBI didn't find anything. Fortunately for the Democrats, for DiFi, there was no investigation of some of the chicanery that they involved themselves in. So, so much for Jeff Flakey. Doris versus Mike is the next item on my card, but I think we kind of cover that under the heading of Demi Ekotny, covered most of the issues there. So I've got yeah, I've got that long break coming up, so I can figure out where to go next. So the big halftime show here on Tall Tales, the drum majors, the marching bands, acrobats, synchronized card sections in the grandstand, etc. And I'll see you after that.
Is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
Bracing for a Friday showdown. I'm Jack Callahan, Fox News. Emotions running high in Washington as a key vote on Supreme Court nominee Judge Brett Kavanaugh approaches.
Protesters were arrested after a big demonstration in a Senate office building. Judiciary Committee Chairman Republican Chuck Grassley says Democrats have just about destroyed a good person for the Supreme Court and says in some circumstances the media contributed.
That's a bias that none of you should be proud of.
After a day of reviewing an FBI report detailing an investigation of sexual misconduct allegations, a handful of senators say they remain undecided on Kavanaugh's nomination.
Fox's Jared Halpern at the Capitol. The first procedural vote, a key test, is only hours away.
By rule, the Senate takes this procedural vote 1 hour after they meet on Friday. And so the Senate is going to meet at 9:30 Eastern Time. The cloture petition, as it's called here in the Senate, which is the procedural vote, it ripens. It's available to be voted on 1 hour after the Senate meets, so that's around 10:30. Most votes in the Senate take about 20 to 30 minutes, so you would think we would have a result on this. Presumably, they would invoke cloture, vote to cut off the filibuster, vote to end debate by about 11. And if they have done so, then the opponents of the nomination get up to 30 hours.
And Fox's Chad Pergram reports that would put the actual confirmation vote late Saturday afternoon. President Trump says it's been very difficult on Judge Kavanaugh, but
I think he's doing very well. I think he's doing very well. The judge is doing well.
The president spoke at a campaign rally last night in Minnesota. They needed extra innings to do it, but the Milwaukee Brewers have taken Game 1 of the National League Division Series. Mike Moustakas with a walk-off RBI single in the 10th inning as the Brewers beat the Rockies 3-2 to take a 1-game-to-none lead. After a down Thursday on Wall Street, Asian stocks closing Friday lower, but Dow futures are trading higher, about 25 points higher. This is Fox News.
For over 30 years, Sanford Technology Group has been helping companies throughout Guam and Micronesia with their payroll, time and attendance, networking, and other information technology services. Our online integrated payroll and time and attendance solution provides the workforce management tools and expertise to make your business more efficient and employee-friendly. For more information, visit Sanford Technology at 335 South Marine Corps Drive or call us at 647-0220 to schedule a demo today.
UFC 229 on Sunday, October 7th. The notorious Conor McGregor returns to retake the UFC lightweight title from unbeaten champion Khabib Nurmagomedov in the main event of UFC 229. Pre-show starts at 10 a.m. and the fight starts at noon. Use your remote or call 688-CARE to order this pay-per-view event on Channel 401 or in HD on Channel 402. UFC 229 on Docomo Pacific is brought to you by TGI Fridays.
Another mission to Pyongyang is about to begin.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is going back to North Korea tomorrow to continue denuclearization talks. The last time he went in July, North Korean officials said it didn't go so well, and since then they've complained that they stopped missile tests, but Washington hasn't relaxed sanctions. Pompeo is expected to lay the groundwork for another possible summit between President Trump and Kim Jong-un. He's then headed to Japan and South Korea, as well as China, to discuss the efforts in North Korea. But tensions have lately worsened with China. President Trump and Vice President Pence both recently accused China of interfering with midterm elections, saying China does not want Trump as president because of tariffs. Jessica Rosenthal, Fox News.
The South Korean court has sentenced former South Korean President Lee Myung-bak to 15 years in prison over a slew of corruption charges, including bribery and embezzlement. Lee served as president from 2008 to 2013, has a week to appeal. His successor, Park Geun-hye, is already serving a 33-year prison term from a separate corruption scandal. In New York, someone has gunned down a reputed member of New York's Bonanno crime family in the Bronx. Police say a gunman shot 71-year-old Sylvester Zatola 4 times as he waited for coffee in a fast food drive-thru Thursday night. Police are calling it a mafia-style assassination. As many as 57 people in 16 states have become ill. Epidemiologists suspect from beef tainted with salmonella from a packing plant in Arizona. The JBS Tolleson plant near Phoenix has voluntarily recalled more than 6.5 million pounds of ground beef to be safe. The number of people killed in the earthquake and tsunami in Indonesia has now soared past 1,550. It's now been a week since the 7.5 magnitude earthquake and the big wave that followed. I'm Jack Callahan, and this is Fox News.
Are high power bills sending your budget into chaos? Take control with the help of Micronesia Renewable Energy. Using the highest quality panels, a solar energy system from MRE will guarantee to save you money on power. With MRE, Christmas comes early. With every solar energy system, homeowners not only get $400 for signing up, but also an entry for a chance to win $1,000 in cold, hard cash, just in time for Christmas. It pays to be an MRE customer. Conditions apply. Call 632-2613 for details. MRE, the smarter choice.
The Bob Klitsky Show is brought to you by Sanford Technology Group, STG, delivering service that can't be beat.
At Guam Regional Medical City, it is our mission to become the island's premier choice for specialty care, like cardiology, pulmonology, neurosciences, orthopedics, oncology services, and more. We aim to protect our island from heart attacks, strokes, cancer, and diabetic complications. But should you suffer from such diseases, we're ready with world-class options, both inpatient and outpatient. For more information, visit us at grmc.gu.
Call the experts at Guam Hearing Doctors if you're worried about your hearing. The evaluation is simple and painless.
Calvo started with a simple handshake. As we celebrate 80 years, we extend a hand to all of you who have taken our hand in trust, to the dreamers and realists, the families, the businesses, the young at heart and the old souls, our manumku and our children. From all of us to all of you, our deepest, happiest, and infinite thanks.
80 years here for you. 80 years thanks to you. Calvo's Insurance, a legacy of trust.
Well, good call, Carl. You made it just in time for the big halftime show, so that worked out pretty well for you. And Juanita, you've been so regular before for so long, and given the kerfuffle involved here with no Facebook Live, I can't mark you. I can't put a T next to your name on the roll call. So glad to have you on board here, and I'm very happy to report that we've got 10 people watching us now on YouTube. So the audience is building rather rapidly. So before the break, I was wondering, I've got three things here that I really want to talk about, and I got to make a choice here. One of them starts out kind of the headline is "The Race Heats Up," and it's Ray and Lou throwing brickbats at one another, and then Frank Uggan apparently, at least if not putting his hat into the ring, at least putting his toe into the water. If the mixed metaphor police don't get me on that one, I'll be safe for the rest of my life. So that's a pretty good story. And then I wanted to rag on the legislature a little bit for two things, or actually three things that they've done. One is the story is Guam senators passed limited medical marijuana bills. And the other one, lawmakers could change Guam's open government law, and they've got an incredibly stupid idea on the Guam open government law. So I think I'll start with there. And then since part of our international radio listening audience has raised the marijuana question, maybe I'll do that after the open government angle. But this is what Theodore says: when the topic comes up again regarding the marijuana law just passed, in your professional opinion, does the zero tolerance law that mirrors federal drug law have any effect to the new law just passed? And then a comment, sad. And then Theodore goes on to say, are disabled protected if they grow cannabis for medical needs? So I suppose I ought to go into the marijuana thing after we talk about open government law. So here's the latest brilliant idea from the legislature. Candidates hoping to be as you were. It's important that Guam's open government law be uniform and consistent so the public understands the rules and how to participate, said Vice Speaker Therese Tetlahi. During session on Tuesday, Tetlahi argued against a bill that would allow agencies to write their own rules and regulations for holding public meetings via teleconference. The problem, supporters of the change said, is government boards and commissions often fail to meet because too few board members can attend to form a quorum. As a result, the business of government can be held up for months, they said, as some boards meet only monthly. Bill 292-34, a Dennis Rodriguez product, would change the open government law to allow members of government boards and commissions to attend meetings by video teleconference. It would also give boards and commissions the option of videos live streaming their meetings. Well, that's a darn good idea. One horrible idea and one good idea. It still doesn't balance out. And Rodriguez's bill will allow each board or commission to create its own rules. I can't think of two worse ideas than this, that to say that boards and commissions don't actually have to sit down at a table at a properly called and noticed meeting to do the public business. They could all do it just kind of like we're trying to do it now. With technology, with teleconferencing. it's just not the same. As much as I enjoy interacting here with our international radio listening audience, and Facebook audience, and now YouTube audience, the way we do it, it's not the same as sitting down and looking somebody in the eye and talking to him and listening to him and observing his body language and all of the other things. So I can't think of a worse idea than to allow people to attend these meetings by teleconferencing. Some folks would just never show up. And I understand that this is even tolerated at the legislature, that one senator, instead of coming to a public hearing, participated by teleconferencing. Wow. So sometimes I agree with Therese Terlahi. Sometimes maybe not so much. But Therese Terlahi said the open government law was written to benefit the public and not for the convenience of government board members. I got to repeat that. Terlahi, during debate, said the open government law was written to benefit the public and not for the convenience of government board members. Truer words were never spoken. And I've ranted more than once about the ineffectiveness of some of the boards and commissions that we've had, and I've opined that if all we're going to do is skirt around the open government law and make arbitrary and capricious, dumb decisions, we don't need 6 or 7 people to do that. We could probably find one person who could do it quite well. And if this bill becomes law, then we wouldn't even need one person. We could do it all. We could do it all with our computers. We could probably do it with our iPhones. So you can imagine how this is going to work out. You know, somebody sitting in his favorite coffee shop or perhaps having a liquid refreshment, holding his iPhone like this, teleconferencing his attendance at the meeting. What a stupid idea. You know, we've got to develop a new feature here, Real Joe Cruz. We have to have some kind of a prize to award when one of our senators comes up with a whopper like this one.
A new car.
New car.
No?
A new car with 4 flat tires, maybe, huh? So that's it for the open government law. And then the other thing that I wanted to talk about is Guam senators passed limited medical marijuana bills. And it says, in the wake of September's legalization of recreational marijuana in the CNMI, Guam lawmakers are finally taking baby steps toward the highly regulated personal use of the plant for medicinal purposes. Guam voters approved medical marijuana in a 2014 referendum. By a vote of 8-3, 3 excused absences, lawmakers approved Bill 302 relative to permitting the home cultivation of medical cannabis under certain conditions. Now, I had one regular tall-tale caller who always wanted to talk about cannabis but never wanted to talk about marijuana. So think about that for a moment. So I guess we'll stick with cannabis here for the purpose of this news story, because that's the word that's used sometimes. By a vote of 7-4 with 3 excused absences. Too bad they couldn't have been there by teleconference, right? On Thursday, lawmakers approved Bill 326 relative to granting waiver authority to the governor for certain requirements related to laboratories and dispensaries. Related legislation aimed at quickening the establishment of medical marijuana testing labs is on hold. Bill 327 would amend the sections of Guam Code relating to the regulating the application and licensing process for medical cannabis business and license classification, medical practices, health and safety, etc., by seeking to eliminate the requirement of 51% local ownership in a medical cannabis testing laboratory. The amendment is now in the second reading file and marked passed on file. Passed on file means you probably never see it again. Committee on Rules Chair Regine Lee confirms we voted yesterday on various other legislation, so it would need to be added to a future agenda. Yeah. So that's what happened. Now, one of our Facebookers back last week asked if I would give my take on the whole medical cannabis project. And have you been waiting for that, Real Joe Cruz?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm waiting. I've been waiting for that.
All right. Well, I didn't know you've hidden it so well. So maybe I should call you the poker face Joe Cruz instead of the real Joe Cruz. But here's my take. We start out with a proposition that marijuana is a Scheduled I drug, which means that it's illegal for anyone to possess it, cultivate it, sell it, etc. And the way the scheduling system set up, Schedule I means that it has no recognized experimental or medical value. It's the way I remember it. I suppose Smarty over there probably could give me more accurate language, but basically that's it. So I have said that if there is anything to the idea that marijuana or cannabis has a medical value, we ought to try to find out about it. And we would do that by removing it from Schedule I and putting it somewhere in the schedule where appropriate research can be done. Anecdotal research that, seems to be quite important to proponents is not that convincing. There are medical establishments, doctors, research hospitals, universities, etc., that could do a pretty good job on researching this. And if, in fact, it does have medical use, then we should, like any other drug, we should make it available to the public. And we know how to do that because we have a Food and Drug Administration that rides herd on all of the drugs that people are able to buy, the legal ones that they're able to buy. Now, of course, that might not be as great as nice a thing as some people might, some proponents might think, because the Food and Drug Administration is not the easiest part of the government to deal with. I understand that to put a new drug on the market costs about $1 billion. But if you can get a new drug approved, you might make $10 billion. I don't know if that's the case with marijuana or cannabis or not. But so, one, get it off Schedule I and find out what its medical uses are. If it has medical uses, then let's treat it like every other drug with the FDA. I don't see that there's as much as I'm a real federalist. That is, I believe in allowing states to handle most of the business of government. I could see the wisdom in allowing the Food and Drug Administration to get involved here. But as far as the criminalization of marijuana, perhaps that should be a state function and not a function of the national government. When the Controlled Substance Act passed back in 1970, that was what came through my mind. What business does the national government have in criminalizing drugs? But I think that bridge has already been jumped off of. So if it does have a medical value, fine. If not, well, that's that. I don't see that in this era where we have so many drug problems on our island with ice and huge blocks of cocaine washing up on the shores, and remembering the heroin problems that we had back in the 70s, I don't know that we would be doing ourselves any favors by legalizing another mind-altering drug. Now, I'm not drawing a connection between marijuana or hard drugs or anything like that. That's just the way I see it. I don't see that we would be doing ourselves any favors in doing that. Here on the island, of course, we are governed by people who took an oath to support the Constitution and the laws of the United States applicable to Guam. Well, marijuana is against the law, so it's quite a mouthful for us to say we're going to legalize it. It's quite a mouthful for a senator, but the governor is especially enjoined in the Organic Act, in a section of the Organic Act. He's supposed to enforce or execute federal laws on Guam. So what we have here are, 2 or 3 loopholes wrapped in loopholes. We start out with the proposition that there's a federal law against growing, possessing, selling marijuana, etc. If it weren't for that, then we perhaps might not have the thriving local interest, because in a sense it protects local interests. And we also have the Rohrabacher Amendment, which said that even though marijuana is a Schedule 1 drug, we're not going to spend any appropriated money on enforcing the law. So that's the second loophole. And the third loophole we have is that we enacted a referendum in 2014 that said that marijuana should be legal. I didn't pay that much attention to the referendum at the time, but I'd have to say this, that referenda and initiatives are very good for dealing with a simple yes or no kind of question. As an example, should we allow casino gambling in Guam? Yes or no? My answer to that would be no. And the same with, should we allow cannabis on Guam? Now, when such an initiative passes, you come back to the old saying that initiatives and referenda empower amateurs, that people that are not skilled in the art of making laws. That's supposed to be the expertise of our legislature. Given my rant about the open government law today, probably say that it's not something that I would sign up for. So I'm going to go back to Theodore has filled in some of his comments a little bit. Theodore says, are disabled protected if they grow cannabis for medical needs? And then let's see. Teddy boy, this time they actually do stuff the 3-4 weeks prior to election. And then Theodore says, word of the week is waiver. I know, dear old practice to push bills at this time. And then zero tolerance introduced by Senator Pilar Lujan passed into law. I'm not so sure that I can follow this, but apparently Senator Pilar Lujan had something to do with a zero tolerance bill for people who were disabled. Anyhow, going back to what I was saying about this, I think that, I'm a rule of law kind of guy, and I don't like the idea of us blatantly violating law by the national government, and I kind of feel like the same way I feel about Scalia and the Second Amendment. I don't think that the Congress should be getting involved in criminal laws that are best addressed by the states, but it is in fact the law, and from my reading, a lawyer runs a risk of being held to an ethical violation by counseling people in the marijuana business, considering that to do that would be to assist someone in breaking the law. So a short break, and we'll come back to this.
Family Finance, serving the people of Guam since 1959. Now you can start planning for the holidays by getting a personal Christmas loan from $1,000 up to $3,500. Family Finance has 3 convenient locations to serve you. Give them a call in Dededo, 633-4473, Hagåtña, 475-4545, and the Upper Tumon location on the 2nd floor of the Pacific Building at 647-5626. Get your Christmas loans today from Family Finance.
So it's the 7th inning stretch, Facebook, YouTube Live, and the center field bleachers at Wrigley Field. It's still the 7th inning stretch. So I hope everybody had a good stretch. A couple more innings of tall tales yet to go, and I'm still ranting and raving about this marijuana bill that passed, or these marijuana bills that passed. I think it's... I think they're poorly done. The entire exercise since that referendum, including the referendum, has been an exercise in the inability of the legislature to pass laws and to recognize the difference between rules and regulations and laws. Not long ago, they spent a long time enacting rules and regulations. Well, legislatures don't enact rules and regulations. Administrative agencies do. Administrative agencies submit the rules to the legislature, and if they lay before the legislature for 90 days, the rules are effective. During that 90 days, the legislature can enact a law that says the rules are rejected, or enact a law saying that the rules are approved. But as soon as the legislature starts amending those rules, the rules are no longer rules anymore. Obviously, they become statutes. Now, you'd expect people in a full-time legislature to understand that, but apparently they don't. And when it goes to understanding in a full-time legislature, this Bill 326 is probably as extreme as anything I've ever seen. And this is the, Theodore would like this. It talks about waivers. And it says the governor of Guam is authorized to waive, by way of executive orders, requirements related to laboratories and dispensaries that are engaged or will be engaged in the medicinal cannabis program envisioned in the KC Conception Cannabis Act of 2013. And you start right out there with some separation of powers arguments. The legislature can't delegate its authority to the governor. And by the same token, the governor's executive order authority is embedded in the Organic Act. So I don't know that the legislature has the ability to tell the governor how to execute executive orders. I think that perhaps is his province, and he's limited in the execution of executive orders by the state of the law in which he would promulgate such an executive order. But here the legislature wants to delegate its power, some of its power, with respect to laboratories and dispensaries to the governor. That's problematically, right? And then here's more of the legislature teaching the governor, as we used to say back on the farm, teaching the governor how to suck eggs. Any such executive order shall contain an explanation of the need for the waiver, which must include include an explanation of why existing requirements impede or otherwise obstruct fulfillment of the Conception Act. So the governor can waive portions of the statute if he explains why he's doing it. And then 30 days after he's done it, it takes effect. And then after that, within 30 days of the filing of any such waiver with the Speaker, the legislature may pass a legislative resolution rejecting in part or in whole the governor's waiver. Such duly passed legislative resolution shall deem such executive waiver null and void. This is the craziest thing that I think I've ever seen in my 40-plus years of watching our law factory on island work. So the legislature, there is a law that has certain requirements with respect to laboratories and dispensaries. But the governor, if he does a good job of explaining in an executive order, can waive those requirements. But if the legislature doesn't like it, then it can by resolution deem the executive order null and void. Well, you don't deem something null and void. And talk about separation of powers. A legislative resolution is worth about as much as the paper. No, not that much, because some of the stuff that the legislature kicks out is on pretty expensive paper when they issue these commendatory resolutions. As a matter of law, it's worth nothing. But here, the legislature has taken it upon itself to, by resolution, say that an executive order is null and void. Probably we should take the word null and void out of people's vocabulary. Void is more than enough. Someday I'll explain why both terms are used, but no need to do it today. So this is really a silly law. But coming back to Ted Nelson's question, Theodore Nelson's question, I don't think that there is any special provision in the national drug regulatory scheme for disabled people. And then he goes on to say, does federal drug laws supersede any Guam laws? Just want to know, do we have sovereignty? Well, yeah, federal drug laws do supersede any Guam laws. And no, Guam doesn't have sovereignty. Territories don't have sovereignty. So as ugly as the truth may be, Congress can basically pass whatever law it wants to for Guam. And if they were listening to tall tales today, if Bill 326-34 were passed, they might want to, by congressional act, nullify it, not based on its substance, but because of the idiocy of what it attempts to do with two branches of our government. So no, the government of Guam, the territory of Guam is not sovereign. And I know there's a strong movement for independence out there, and that's the only way that Guam would have sovereignty. As a territory, no. The only sovereignty in the territory of Guam is the national sovereignty. So that pretty well does it for cannabis, marijuana, and the idiocy dealing with the open government. I don't know which one of those things is the more upsetting. The fact that the government would tamper with the open government law and say that people could attend a meeting of a border commission by teleconference, or the thing that Dennis put together that allows the governor to exercise a legislative function and the legislature to nullify an executive function. It takes a lot of creativity to come up with this kind of stuff. Anyhow, going on, I've got a little time here to get into the race heats up. And the gloves came off. This is a story from the Post during a gubernatorial forum on Thursday. Leon Guerrero launched the first salvo. In response to a question about improving the island's economy, she accused the Calvo Tenorio administration of doubling Guam's debt. We now pay $92 million in debt service every year, which we could use for education and health care. Lou makes a good point, you know, that we keep on, in order to continue Kathy Kakigi's kerfuffle, we keep building up these deficits where we don't have enough money to pay for everything. So we do enough cash management to get us through for a long enough time until we can borrow more money so we can start the process all over again. I think we're all too familiar with that. Lou says we now pay $92 million in debt service every year, which we could use for education and health care. Leon Guerrero also reiterated her charge that the current administration has managed to not collect taxes to the tune of $200 million. Tenorio called for a fact check, noting, as he has before, that the amount of recoverable taxes is $70 million, not $200 million. So I suppose I could be polite and put the word only in front of 70. It's only $70 million that we're not collecting. 200 is horrible. 70 million is just really, really bad. So that's a pretty good defense, right? He then turned to Leon Guerrero and suggested she would have an innate conflict of interest. Now, I don't know what an innate conflict of interest is. Innate means it's something that you come across sort of as part of your being. She showed great innate intelligence, even though she'd never been to school. Maybe what he's talking about is inherent conflict. Fortunately, we don't grade candidates for their grammatical use of the language. Anyhow, he says that she has an innate conflict of interest if she were to become governor because of her position as the chairperson of the Bank of Guam's board of directors. The bank, Tenorio said, has benefited from hundreds of millions of dollars in government of Guam funds that have been deposited with the bank. I wonder whether she would be allowing that money to be put in other banks equally across our island rather than being conflicted with every single financial transaction of the government. It's a very good point. Lou is the chairman of the board. Her son is the acting president of the bank. She is allowed that. She has taken a leave until January as the president of the bank. I don't know exactly how many shares she owns in the bank, but I bet it's a bunch. So it's a lot of concentration of wealth in one person, enough that allowed her to spend more of her own money on her campaign than the other four candidates' campaigns spent with to include fundraising. Leon Guerrero counted that the Bank of Guam has been one of the most aggressive financial institutions on the island in providing loans to island families so they can build homes, start businesses, and send their children to school. How about this one, asked Leon Guerrero, recalling that Tenorio signed the controversial GovGuam pay raise legislation in 2014. I never signed a law that gave me a pay raise, she said. That's a blatant conflict of interest. And actually, Lou is being kind of kind there. She really didn't sock it to Ray as hard as she could have, because if you'll remember, in 2014, November 21, 2014, we had the Ray Tenorio combining with the Juan Pat 10 to give themselves huge retroactive pay raises in about an hour. Ray as the acting governor, called the legislature into special session. He sent a bill over that would increase his and the governor's and directors' and senators' salaries, and the bill would have been effective back to about the beginning of that legislative session, even though it passed in November of 2014. In about an hour, the legislature passed the bill, sent it back to Ray, and he signed it that same day. Now, I don't know. I guess it's a conflict of interest. However, there's no other way under our law, for a governor to get a pay raise or for a senator to vote for it. Sometimes there is a necessity there, but it really showed a degree of avarice that is almost without precedent in our government, to give themselves such huge raises. And this was just a couple weeks after they had been elected to office. So if anything, Lou kind of was soft pedaling on that one. When asked about the cost of living, Tenorio said most people are not born into wealth, motioning towards Leon Guerrero. He added, I don't take it away from anyone who is. Most people on island are struggling all the time. Quote, fact check, Leon Guerrero replied. I was never born into wealth. I worked hard through school. My parents sacrificed to provide for their family. We're here for you. That's it, Tenorio said in closing, referring to the public. I come from a poor house. I came from humble beginnings. But in the end, I'm only here for you. Leon Guerrero wrapped it up by saying, who do you trust? I say a mother, a grandmother, a senator, and a successful businesswoman. So the sparks flew a little bit there. And, of course, it's pretty easy to see the portraits that each of the candidates is attempting to paint himself into. Ray wants to present himself as everyman, the kid that came from the poor side, and by working hard was able to get into a position where he could be a politician and help people. Lou, as the competent professional who has always had the people's best interests in her heart, and because she's a mother and a nurse and these other things, is the person that we ought to put in Adelup. So, very interesting. Even more interesting, we may have a third team in the race. This story is from the Post. Argon Limtiako back in the running. So I'm going to come back on the home stretch and do this one. I think I'll save my social commentary until Monday. So here we are, the home stretch on Tall Tales. I got about 10 minutes to wrap it up. I see my phone ringing here. I wonder if my friend R. Carl is going to help me close out the show as he has on so many occasions here. Yeah, it looks like it's R. Is it R. Carl? Yeah. Good afternoon, Carl.
Hey, Bob. Sorry, I've been out on the field today. I kind of joined the show late, and of course, you're having your technical issues.
Yeah, but you found your way to YouTube Live, so that's pretty good, Carl.
Yeah, I hacked my way through the tech jungle, and somehow I found my way. I don't know how. I've got a couple of questions for you. Since you were talking about laws before, and I actually burst out laughing when you talked about that law about some of our officials attending meetings on, using just tech from their favorite, I guess, tavern or cafe or whatever.
Sure.
I thought that was kind of humorous. But I remember, before the election, one of the ideas that then candidate Trump brought up was of rescinding 2 laws for every law passed. And I was thinking, that would be a great idea for Guam. Although, we're a smaller locale, we don't have as many laws. But would it be a good idea, you think? Would it be workable to have a 1-for-1 law where for every law that's passed, we could at least delete one really bad law?
Well,
is that workable, and would that have any value?
I think you're onto something, Carl. There's a little bit of mechanics involved, though, that is necessary. And one of the things is this, that so many things that wind up in our law books are situational. There's a problem, and someone sits down and scribbles a statutory solution on the back of an envelope, and it's very quickly enacted into law, and it has very little use outside of dealing with that particular solution. If you look at all of the statutes that deal with acting appointments and people who fail for confirmation, it's a classic example. There's section after section, and the thing doesn't fit together very well. You have to sit down and really study it to figure out what it means. And the reason is that much of it is situational. Then we have some laws on the books that have been around ever since, and no one has ever thought to go through and clean out the law books from stuff that maybe we don't really need anymore. As an example, we have a law that says if a person kills another person in a duel, you know, like Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr, if one person kills another person in a duel, the killer is responsible to support the widow and the children until the children become adults, and the widow for the rest of her life. Now, we really need a law like that on the books, right? Because we have so...
That does seem a little out of place. Although with a little tweaking and reworking, you know, that might be a way to resolve some political disputes between political candidates, you know.
Well, it would be good for those clothiers that sell gloves, wouldn't it?
Yes, it would.
Yeah. So there's that. And then another thing is that we have something called a Uniform Commercial Code on the books. And when I shoved off for law school, Guam and Louisiana were the only two American jurisdictions that had never adopted the Uniform Commercial Code. It's super technical, it's long, it's hard to read, it's about as friendly as the Internal Revenue Code, but it's absolutely necessary to facilitate commerce. So we finally passed it back in 1977. And I have an interesting anecdote that I'll tell you sometime as to how it finally got passed. But it got passed, but we've never updated it. So a new title has been added to it. We didn't do that. We haven't updated the provisions. So we have something that anyone contemplating doing business on Guam that requires sales is going to look at that and say, oh, wow, do I have to do that? Because the Uniform Commercial Code is one of those uniform laws. So, you know, kind of like if you know how it works in Illinois, you know how it works in Oklahoma, and you ought to know how it works here. Well, it doesn't work that way here because we just didn't pay any attention to it. So the solution to all of these things is a law revision commission. We used to have a law revision commission back in the 70s, and there was a law revision commission that put together our criminal code and our criminal procedure code. Up until that time, we just copied California law. So that's how we got the criminal code and the criminal procedure code. And a well-constructed law revision commission could go through and do some of the things that I've been talking about here, and there would be a good chance of their passing. Because stuff like the Uniform Commercial Code is very difficult to get a politician interested in it, because no politician sees much future in spending a lot of time and political capital revising a Uniform Commercial Code and then going out on the campaign trail and says, hey, hooray for me, I updated the Uniform Commercial Code. And the average voter is going to say, so what? You know what? Why should I care about that? In other words, it doesn't have any pizzazz. But if you have a properly constructed law review commission that does a workmanlike job, then a politician can say, yeah, I'm going to get behind this because I can kind of coast along on the prestige of that particular commission. And I don't want to run the risk of opposing something that this prestigious commission has proposed. Does this make any sense, Carl?
Yeah, it does very much. Yeah, you know, we're a small island. We should have a small government. I think we've got a lot bigger than we should have. But I think to me, it made sense. You know, when I thought about it, and I just wanted to pass it by your legal mind and, you know, for your thoughts to see if, you know, it had any possibilities. And I'm glad that you see something in it. I hope there is such a commission that is put together. I imagine it would be, how would it be put together? It would be comprised of lawyers, I'm sure, but how would they be chosen?
Well, there are a lot of different ways you could do it. You could let the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court do it. You could let the governor, with the advice and consent of the legislature, do it, etc. And in most jurisdictions, there's a certain cachet that goes along with being the member of a law revision commission for that state. In other words, it gives you bragging rights, something you can put in your resume. It would take us a little while, I think, to get to that point, but we did have that commission. We brought a guy out here from California named Jack Horton who did all of the work, and then there was actually a commission that supervised him and approved his work, etc. Then after that, Jack Rosenzweig was the guy who actually did the work for the Law Revision Commission. So any candidate out there who's interested in such a thing, 888-8255, and we can talk about it on Tall Tales, right, Carl?
Yeah, very good. I hope that idea comes back to life and that someone pursues it and it's done again. I think it's needed, and the more time passes, the more it's needed, I think.
I think you're absolutely right on that, Carl. So thanks a lot for helping me close out the program again. And we got a couple of tough days ahead of us. No Tall Tales for 2 days. But at least we can look at today's program on YouTube, I think, right?
Yes. Yeah, it's going to be tough. I'm going to be jonesing for 2 days, but I'll try and make it through.
Okay, Carl. Well, we'll see you on Monday then.
All right.
So long.